Hello there, people of the internet. I'm here to tell you guys about a brief history on guns. Now, this is by no means a complete, comprehensive guide of every gun ever in existence, but I feel like this right here will be a good guide on what to think about when we talk about firearms from specific time periods and specific eras. So back in around 1300, 1400, somewhere around there, either the Chinese or the Vikings made gunpowder. There's kind of a hot debate on who it is that actually made that. I'll let you guys go talk about that in the comments. They made gunpowder. Gunpowder explodes whenever it is ignited with a flame or some sort of fire source. And it did not take people long to figure out that if they put gunpowder inside of a closed tube with something in front of it, once it explodes, it will launch that thing in one direction or the other. Originally, guns were less, guns that fired projectiles and more or less like fire sticks, and they just kind of spat out the gunpowder in a huge wave of fire. But as time progressed, firearms became more predominant as they became more effective and more useful. As metallurgy got better and ironwork got better and just things with human technology started to advance, the earliest forms of firearms started to exist, and those were basically a tube that had, some sort of projectile over some sort of powder. The types of black powder that were used had different compositions, and there's different things that you can do, but generally speaking, it was all potassium nitrate, sulfur, and charcoal that they were using for this gunpowder mixture. And although the actual composition didn't change, there were different variations with how these elements were mixed, and some people say this is the best way to do it, some people say that is the best way to do it. Depending on how fine ground that powder is, that dictates how fast it's going to burn, but this isn't a lesson on black powder. This is a lesson on the firearms that used it. So you had some sort of projectile, some sort of powder, and some sort of ignition system on basically a tube that people would either hold under their arm like this or above their shoulder like this. It was inaccurate. Rifling wasn't a thing. And as time had progressed, it was discovered that if you strap it to a piece of wood, this tube to a piece of wood, it would make it much easier and much more stable to be able to light off. Then came the systems where you had some sort of better system for igniting this particular gunpowder, and we have the birth of your muzzle loaders. So muzzle loader, this right here literally is just that original style of metal tube, and it's closed off at one end, and you got some sort of ignition system. Originally, like the earliest forms were like matchlock, and then we progressed to flintlock, and there's wheel locks and all sorts of different ways to ignite the ignition system. But for the most part, it was something that made spark or had spark that went into some sort of flash pan that ignited the powder inside of the flash pan, ignited the powder inside of the muzzle loader, and that powder explodes and sends the ball flying forward. So come, I don't know, sometime around 1850 or so, it was, well, it's long since been known that creating a spark to ignite black powder for your muzzle loader is a little on the unpredictable side. You never quite know whenever it's going to go off, so people were consistently trying to find better ways to make these rifles go off more predictably. So around 1850, 1855, somewhere in that time period, somebody had come up with a percussion cap, and that is what we have right here. This right here is the same sort of muzzle loader that would have been used for a long period of time. The only difference is the ignition system that we have on this one is a percussion cap. Now, once the percussion cap comes around, that is a mercury fulminate cap. That ignites the gunpowder inside of the system much more easily, but the percussion cap is a nice small little cap that a hammer smacks onto in order to ignite. And with the discovery of this mercury fulminate, people were deciding to go ahead and load all of what they need to fire a rifle into one singular cartridge. So although these muzzle loaders right here were very predominant during this time period, we also had cartridge firing rifles like the 1860 Henry come out. This right here was a rimfire cartridge, but centerfire cartridges were soon to follow, and that right there was very similar to the percussion cap system. The only difference is everything was engaged in one singular cartridge. So whereabouts just after the American Civil War, whenever the United States decided to themselves, hey, we need a better rifle, one that is not muzzle loaded, one that takes an actual cartridge firing system. So early breech loading systems began to pop up not just inside the United States but all around the world, and they were very similar to your muzzle loaders. We have a plane flying overhead. I guess I'm gonna have to stand here and wait for that. I do believe that our plane has finally moved on. For something moving at, supersonic speeds, it sure likes to move slow as it travels across my area of audibility, and I can still kind of hear it in the background. So around the time period of after the Civil War, 1865 and then on, countries were looking into using these cartridges, these newfound, newly made, newly produced cartridges, these self-contained firing systems to be loaded inside of some sort of breech loading system. A lot of these countries were looking to convert their old muzzle loaders to breech loading systems, and that's kind of where this system came from. This isn't a conversion, this is an 1873 model, but where this idea came from was converting these old systems. So all around the world, countries were adopting these single-shot rifles, and literally it is just a breech-loading rifle, very similar to the muzzle loader. All you do is you take your new cartridge. The systems look a little bit different. Some of them have bolt actions, some of them are breakaways, some of them have rolling systems, some of them have all sort of different systems behind how they load in their single cartridges. But single-shot black powder rifles, there was definitely becoming more predominant during the time period of right after the Civil War, not just in the United States, but all around the world. This was just the technology that was popping up at the time. Now, black powder firearms, they tend to have a very large projectile that comes out of the barrel, as opposed to modern day projectiles, which have, typically speaking, a very small projectile coming out of the barrel. That is because your very large, thank you Kevin, Kevin's screaming in the background, man, I got lots of background noise today. Very large projectiles were necessary with black powder to get a lot of energy transferred onto the target, simply because black powder is not that great of a propellant, and like the maximum speeds you're going to propel something with black powder, like absolute maximum, and this is like really pushing it, is about 1,700 feet per second. So in order, since you can't get the velocities, in order to get more energy on target, you have yourself a larger projectile. So that is kind of what the mindset was with these rifles for a very long time, and rifles all around the world were basically single shots that were sending one shot of lead downrange. Now, as time progressed, there were countries starting to see, hey, we need more than just one single shot inside of our rifles. We need a way to be able to cycle these systems and have multiple rounds that we can have on standby inside of the rifle to send downrange. So that is actually about the time period where bolt-action rifles started to exist. We see bolt-action single-loading rifles, but during this time period, around the 1880s or so, countries really started to look into having some sort of magazine system, whether or not it's a box magazine or a tube magazine, or, insert choice of magazine system here. Countries all around the world were looking for some sort of way to be able to send more ammo downrange at a faster pace. So we see a lot of repeating bolt actions start to come into existence, and not long after this time period, the French ended up making smokeless powder. Now, smokeless powder made black powder obsolete basically overnight, because whenever smokeless powder ignites, it is a much, much better propellant, and it can send projectiles traveling at way faster velocities than black powder ever could. So a lot of countries around this time period were starting to develop bolt-action rifles, originally in black powder, but they were like, hey, smokeless powder's a thing now, let's go ahead and make some smokeless powder bolt-actions. So a lot of your bolt-actions out there from this time period were designed to be ran with smokeless powder as opposed to black powder. There are black powder primarily using bolt-action rifles out there, but a lot of them are single-shot bolt-actions. There are some repeating bolt-actions out there. Not a whole lot, but during this time period, smokeless powder came out, so a lot of countries just kind of transitioned from their black powder rifles to these smokeless powder rifles. Now, I put this on because I have a couple of rounds inside of this rifle. Let's go ahead and send some lead downrange. I'm going to test out this microphone, see how it handles a little bit of gunfire. This is 8mm Mauser from a Turkish Mauser that we will launch at this target. Alright. Well, that really was not that hard of a kick. This right here is Yugoslavian surplus 198 grain. And it would appear that I have a case stuck This is just surplus stuff. I have a case stuck in my bore. I am getting the feeling that I will probably have to replace the extractor inside of this Mauser, because I do have issues with stuck cases. That is a fault of this particular Mauser, and likely the ammunition as well, because this ammo is definitely not on the cleaner side. Smacked it again. Again, failure to extract. Yeah, I'm going to have to replace the extractor on this. And once more, let's see if this one extracts. There's another. Yeet! That one extracted. Fantastic. So yeah, the extractor on this one is just a little worn out. Now those 8mm Mauser rounds, the projectiles themselves are dramatically smaller and skinnier than something that would be fired out of, say, the 4570. This right here originally fired a 405 grain bullet, whereas those were just 198 grain projectiles. However, those are still going to be traveling at about 2,500 feet per second, something that black powder simply is unable to do. This new smokeless powder was more capable of sending projectiles downrange at far faster velocities, which is why the projectiles got smaller to not only increase velocity, but you get lighter weight ammunition, be able to carry more ammunition, and there's just a lot of pros to having lighter weight ammo, smaller ammo. It's more effective at very long ranges. There's definitely a lot of pros. During this time period, more or less, I'd say around the turn of about 1900, countries started going from like round-nosed bullets, more of your traditional round-nosed bullets, to more of a pointed Spitzer-style bullet. So it is more effective at long ranges. Pointed bullets really cut through wind very effectively, as opposed to like a round-nosed bullet trying to hit out at things that are at a large distance away. Countries ended up keeping rifles like this in the First World War. A lot of countries were seeing that large, long rifles like this during the First World War were very impractical and not necessarily the best way to go. It was thought that combat was going to be taking place at way further distances that combat actually took place at, simply because these rifles were able to put rounds out at way further distances than black powder ever could. But humans are humans, and hitting somebody at 2,000 yards probably is not going to be the easiest thing for a human to do. So more often than not, combat took place within 300 yards or less, and having a long rifle like this, especially in the trenches of World War I, really made people see, hey, this is probably not the best idea. So a lot of countries actually cut off the end of the barrels of their rifles, and some countries, we're not going to really go into the carbine versions of certain rifles, like cavalry carbine versions. Basically, cavalry carbine versions, the same exact rifle, just shorter for people using on horseback, so it's more comfortable. A lot of countries would shorten the length of their normal infantry rifle, the rifle that they were giving to basically everyone, because they saw that these long rifles, these long cumbersome rifles, were not necessary. So up until and into the Second World War, you had a lot of countries running around with these long rifles, but you had a lot of countries running around with much shorter rifles. However, their systems were basically the same. This particular Turkish Mauser is a 93 action. A lot of your countries were rocking 98 Mauser actions during that time period. Well, you had a lot of countries running around with bolt-action rifles. However, you had some countries, cough, cough, wink, wink, nudge, nudge, running around with self-loading rifles, and countries with bolt actions were seeing just how good and capable these soldiers were with their self-loading rifles. So countries were looking at their bolt actions, and they were like, we gotta do something different about that. We need rifles that hold more ammo and that are automatic loading systems, so we don't have to sit here and manually cycle the bolt every time we want to fire our rifle. So countries came up, well, the United States first with the M1 Garand, but as time progressed, and basically right at the end of World War II and after World War II, countries were really starting to notice that their bolt-action rifles were obsolescent technology, antiquated technology, pick your poison with those different phrases, and having something that loaded itself was definitely going to be the way to go. So during the Second World War, actually I think it was around 1943 is where the first idea of having an intermediate cartridge firing rifle came into play. The SKS right here never really got into production until after the Second World War, but the idea of an intermediate cartridge firing rifle was definitely on the mind of many, many different countries. They saw that you didn't need this full power rifle round sending lead at ridiculous velocities down at soldiers, especially if the soldiers were only 300 yards in or less, and having a means to have a rifle that actually cycled through the system itself versus you having to manually cycle the system was definitely the best way to go. I got a couple of rounds in this SKS. Let's go ahead and just send these down range. But this right here is a good representation of a country that went from bolt actions trying to go to self-loading systems. This right here is a Russian rifle. And unlike with bolt actions where you have to cycle the bolt every time you want to fire, this right here, this just sends lead downrange as fast as you can pull the trigger. And the ammunition is not nearly as powerful as the full power bolt action rifles that were being used at the time. So lightweight ammo, you can carry a lot more of it. It's still capable out of the distances that combat was actually taking place at. This right here was definitely the wave of the future. However, there were countries out there that were noticing Germany's Sturmgewehr, their STG-44, chambered in 8mm Kurz, and they saw the benefits of having a style of rifle like this. You got the external magazine, 30 round capacity that could be swapped out very, very easily. Select fire, so you can go from having a rifle to having a submachine gun if you need it. The ammunition is nice and lightweight, nice and portable. There's a lot of pros to having a rifle system like this right here. And so there were systems out there that were kind of in-betweens, like this right here, the SKS, that were basically immediately replaced with systems like the AK-47. The SKS never did get a chance to shine with the Russian forces. Now, they got the chance to shine with like Chinese forces and Vietnamese forces and a couple of other countries. But the actual country that created it, Russia, just basically tossed the SKS aside and went to the AK, which was based more around this platform right here. Matter of fact, a lot of countries did. I consider 7.62 NATO to be an intermediate cartridge simply because that is what the intentional design was for. It still has the same ballistic capabilities as the M2 Ball 30-06. However, it is a shorter length cartridge, and it is a lighter weight cartridge, and it is a more efficient cartridge than the full power, full length 30-06. So I do consider 7.62 NATO to be a intermediate caliber cartridge. But NATO forces during this time period, they all standardize on 7.62 and 5.56 NATO. That's a story for another time, but they all adopted a rifle in either 7.62 or 5.56. Most of the time with this particular time period, it was 7.62 NATO. Getting these, well, intermediate caliber rifles that have external magazines and self-loading systems and their select fire and all sorts of good stuff that they had learned from the Second World War to replace their old school style of bolt action rifle. And with the adoption of these rifles, eventually it became known that 7.62 NATO was still a little bit too on the hardcore side, so 5.56 NATO is what came out, and that is where you get your modern firearms. Now, these modern firearms have gone through a lot of developmental processes. There are systems and rails and sights, and we got optics, and we got all of the general preferences to be able to customize these rifles any way that you want. But the actual functionality is very similar to what Germany had done during the Second World War. And I think that right there is a very true testament to how good the engineers, German engineers, were during the Second World War. And we have very capable firearms now. So thanks for watching, folks. I appreciate your time. Hopefully you enjoyed my little segment on the firearms development. Like, subscribe, share, description below, link to all sorts of stuff. Go check that out. You guys go off, have yourself a fantastic day. I got the hiccups and now I got a mess to clean up. I'll see you all on the next episode. once I've done this. Bonnie and Clyde be damned. The poor man's Garen. It's a shame that bolt-action shotguns aren't more mainstream.